Alabama has a landlord-friendly late fee framework with minimal state-level regulation, consistent with the state's overall light-touch approach to landlord-tenant law. The governing law is found in the Alabama Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, Alabama Code, Title 35, Chapter 9A, along with general contract principles. However, as we've discussed in our other Alabama videos, the AURLTA only applies to certain jurisdictions, and in areas where the act hasn't been adopted, the landlord-tenant relationship is governed by common law and the lease agreement. If you're a landlord or tenant in Alabama, what rules apply depends partly on where your property is located. Let's start with the basics. Alabama does not impose a specific statutory dollar cap or percentage cap on late fees. There is no statute that limits the fee to a certain amount or percentage of rent, whether the property is in an AURLTA jurisdiction or not. The fee is governed by the lease terms and general contract principles. Alabama also does not mandate a grace period. There is no state law requiring any specific number of days before a late fee can be charged. If your lease says rent is due on the 1st and a late fee applies on the 2nd, that's enforceable. However, most Alabama landlords include a grace period of 3 to 5 days as standard practice. The key legal principle is reasonableness under Alabama contract law. A late fee is a liquidated damages provision, and Alabama courts apply a well-established standard. Under Alabama law, a liquidated damages clause is enforceable if two conditions are met. The damages from the breach must be difficult or impossible to ascertain at the time of contracting, and the amount fixed must be a reasonable pre-estimate of those damages. If the amount is clearly disproportionate to the actual or probable loss, the provision is treated as an unenforceable penalty. Alabama courts have been generally business-friendly in evaluating liquidated damages, but there are limits. A late fee that roughly corresponds to the landlord's actual administrative costs is easily enforceable. A fee that dramatically exceeds those costs, functioning as punishment rather than compensation, crosses into penalty territory. The analysis focuses on whether the amount was reasonable at the time the lease was signed. What's reasonable in Alabama? The state has one of the more affordable rental markets in the country. Rents in Huntsville, the state's strongest market, typically range from $900 to $1,600. Birmingham is similar. Montgomery, Mobile, and other cities are more affordable. Smaller communities and rural areas have some of the lowest rents in the nation. A flat fee of $25 to $60 or a percentage-based fee of 5 to 10% of the monthly rent is generally defensible. Given Alabama's lower rent levels in many markets, the dollar amounts are modest. A $50 fee on a $1,000 Huntsville rent is 5%, reasonable. A $50 fee on a $500 rent in a smaller community is 10%, at the upper boundary of defensibility. A $100 fee on a $600 rent is nearly 17%, likely excessive. The dual AURLTA and non-AURLTA system in Alabama affects the broader landlord-tenant framework. But the late fee analysis is the same regardless. In both AURLTA and non-AURLTA jurisdictions, the late fee is governed by the lease and the reasonableness standard. The difference is in the procedural framework, notice requirements, eviction processes, and available remedies, not in the late fee analysis itself. The lease must clearly state the late fee terms. This is important in every state, but particularly important in Alabama, where the statutory framework provides minimal guidance. The lease should specify the rent due date, any grace period, the exact fee amount or formula when the fee triggers, whether additional charges apply for continued non-payment, and whether the fee is defined as additional rent. Without clear lease language, the late fee is virtually unenforceable. Compounding late fees in Alabama are governed by the lease and the reasonableness standard. A single one-time fee after the grace period is the simplest and most defensible approach. If your lease includes daily or weekly charges, the total must remain reasonable. A compounding structure that could produce fees exceeding 15 to 20% of the monthly rent within a few weeks would likely be struck down as a penalty, even in landlord-friendly Alabama. Most Alabama landlords use a single flat fee. The interaction between late fees and the eviction process in Alabama depends on whether the property is in an AUR-LTA jurisdiction. In AUR-LTA jurisdictions, the eviction process follows the statutory framework, including specific notice requirements. In non-AUR-LTA jurisdictions, the eviction process is governed by the general unlawful detainer statutes and common law. In AUR-LTA jurisdictions, the landlord must provide proper notice before pursuing eviction for non-payment. The amount demanded must be accurate, including only compliant late fees. Whether late fees can be included depends on the lease. If defined as additional rent, they're includable. Best practice, regardless of jurisdiction, define late fees as additional rent. In non-AUR-LTA jurisdictions, the eviction process may be faster but less procedurally defined. The landlord should still ensure that the amount demanded is accurate. Including non-compliant fees in any legal proceeding creates risk. Alabama does not have a comprehensive statutory framework for security deposit returns comparable to most states. Under Alabama Code Section 35-9A-201, the deposit is limited to 1 month's rent in AUR-LTA jurisdictions. The deposit must be returned within 60 days, one of the longer return periods in the country. In non-AUR-LTA jurisdictions, the deposit is governed primarily by the lease and common law. Unpaid late fees can be deducted if the lease authorizes it and the fees are reasonable. Alabama's Consumer Protection Act, the Alabama Deceptive Trade Practices Act found in Alabama Code Title 8, Chapter 19, prohibits unconscionable and deceptive business practices. While the Act primarily targets consumer sales, it can apply to residential rental practices in certain circumstances. Systematic overcharging of late fees could be challenged under this framework, though litigation under the Act in the landlord-tenant context is uncommon in Alabama. For tenants receiving housing choice voucher assistance, Alabama landlords should not charge late fees when the housing authority's portion is delayed due to processing. The tenant cannot control the authority's payment timeline. If the tenant's portion is paid on time, the fee should apply only when the tenant's own payment is actually late. Alabama's military population is significant and has grown dramatically with Huntsville's expansion as a defense and aerospace hub. Redstone Arsenal, home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, the Army's Space and Missile Defense Command, and the FBI's Operational Technology Division, has transformed Huntsville into one of the fastest-growing cities in the South. The military and defense contractor population generates enormous rental demand. Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, home to Air University, generates military demand in the Montgomery metro. Fort Novosel near Enterprise, formerly Fort Rucker, is the Army's primary helicopter training center. Anniston Army Depot generates demand in the Anniston area. Military pay is predictable, the 1st and 15th, and most military tenants pay reliably. Huntsville's defense contractor workforce, highly compensated engineers, scientists, and program managers, represents an extremely reliable tenant base. Late fee enforcement for this demographic is minimal. Fort Novosel's training mission produces constant rotation of student pilots and instructor cadre. New arrivals may need time to establish direct deposit. Some Enterprise and Daleville landlords accommodate first-month timing. From a practical standpoint, Alabama's rental market has been transformed by Huntsville's emergence as one of the hottest markets in the Southeast, while other parts of the state remain very affordable. Huntsville has experienced remarkable growth. The combination of Redstone Arsenal, NASA Marshall, Mazda Toyota manufacturing, and the broader defense ecosystem has attracted tens of thousands of well-paying jobs. Rents have increased substantially. Desirable areas like Hampton Cove, the villages of Providence, downtown, and South Huntsville commonly range from $1,200 to $1,800. Late fee enforcement among Huntsville's professional tenant base is minimal. These tenants pay on time. Most Huntsville landlords charge flat fees of $40 to $65 with a 5-day grace period. The strong market allows landlords to screen for payment reliability, reducing the need for fee enforcement. Birmingham is Alabama's largest metro with a diverse market. Healthcare, UAB Medical Center is the state's largest employer. Financial services, engineering, and urban revitalization drive demand. Rents vary by neighborhood. Premium in Mountain Brook, Homewood, and the Highland Park area versus affordable in many other neighborhoods. Late fee dynamics vary correspondingly. Birmingham's tenant advocacy community has become increasingly active, and landlords in Birmingham should ensure their fee practices are clearly reasonable. Montgomery has a stable market driven by state government, Maxwell AFB, healthcare, and Hyundai manufacturing. Government and military employees pay reliably. Mobile has a moderate market influenced by the port, Airbus manufacturing, shipbuilding, and healthcare. Tuscaloosa, home to the University of Alabama, has a tight student market. Auburn, home to Auburn University, has similar student-driven dynamics. The university markets, Tuscaloosa, Auburn, Jacksonville State, Troy, have student populations where financial aid timing affects payment patterns. Student late payments at the beginning of each semester are common and typically resolve quickly. Some landlords near these universities build a 5 to 7 day grace period into their student leases. The Black Belt region of central and western Alabama has the softest rental markets in the state. Population decline, limited economic opportunity, and very low incomes characterize this region. Landlords in the Black Belt should set late fees that reflect the local economic reality. A fee appropriate for Huntsville's booming market is unrealistic in a community where rents are $300 to $500 and many residents live on fixed incomes. Alabama's Gulf Coast, Mobile and Baldwin County, faces hurricane risk that periodically disrupts the rental market. The beach communities of Gulf Shores and Orange Beach have tourism-driven seasonal dynamics. During and after major storms, late fee enforcement against affected tenants is both inappropriate and practically unproductive. One best practice for Alabama landlords: determine whether your property is in an AURLTA jurisdiction. If it is, the full statutory framework applies, including specific notice and procedural requirements. If not, common law governs, which gives you more flexibility but less procedural guidance. Either way, the reasonableness standard for late fees applies, and your lease must contain clear, enforceable terms. Another best practice: calibrate your late fee to the specific market where your property is located. Alabama's extreme variation, from Huntsville's booming defense economy to the Black Belt's deep poverty, means a one-size-fits-all approach is inappropriate. A percentage-based fee of 5 to 8% automatically scales to the local rent level. A flat fee should be adjusted by market. $50 works in Huntsville, but may be disproportionate in a community with much lower rents. A third best practice: apply your late fee consistently across all tenants, regardless of the minimal regulatory framework. Alabama's light regulation doesn't exempt landlords from federal fair housing obligations. Selective enforcement, charging late fees based on any protected characteristic, violates federal law. Document every late payment, every fee charged, and every communication. Consistent records across all tenants protect you. For the complete guide to Alabama late fee laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com and subscribe to our channel. You've just completed the most comprehensive late fee law series on YouTube.